Hello everybody! I recently have received a lot of praise about my Hildryn Prime when doing some high level bounties, so I wanted to actually make a build guide so I can show you a little bit about my Hildryn Prime build, because Hildryn is a really strong and good Warframe, and so let me show you how you can make her very effective. So first, I'm going to talk about Hildryn's skills, because that is important here. Now, I do actually have a Hellminth ability, but before we get into the abilities, the main thing that I want to let you know is that Hildryn is a shield-based Warframe, so we're using our shields to power our abilities as opposed to energy. So that being said, the abilities here on Hildryn, the passive is that Hildryn's shield gate is high. After her shields are depleted, she is invulnerable for damage up to 3.5 seconds. You should never really be hitting this where you're invulnerable, because you should always have shields. If you've run out of shields and you're in skill path, you're probably not going to have a good time. So we're just going to ignore that, because we should never be running out of our shields. Then the first ability is Baelfire. Now, this is going to enable the Baelfire Charger, which is an exalted Warframe weapon. We'll get into that a little bit later. We've got Pillage. It basically takes a percentage of shields and armor of nearby enemies, and it replenishes our own shields and overshields. And it also removes status effects from Hildryn and her allies. Now, the thing that I want to say about this is that if you're hovering too high in the sky in your fourth ability, which we'll talk about in just a few seconds here, but if you're hovering too high, Pillage is not gonna hit any enemies. So in order for Pillage to hit enemies, you need to be at ground level with the enemies, like it's showing in this guide here, or hovering extremely close to the ground. And by extremely close, I mean you can only be like maybe a foot off the ground in order to get this to actually hit. Now, her third ability, I actually have this Hellminth. The third ability would technically be Haven, which does the shield tether to your allies to restore their shields. It's not the most useful ability, so I've actually placed this in the Hellminth with rebuild shields. And the reason that I have done this is because when I'm hovering in the sky, I can just go ahead, I can click this ability. It's only got a 12-second cooldown. It restores 100% of our shields, and that way I don't have to necessarily be at ground level for Pillage to hit. Now, there's a lot of other things you can also do in the Hellminth, which we'll get to a little bit later in the video. And then the fourth ability is the most important ability, and it's called Aegis Storm. So what this does effectively is it makes you hover in the air, and then it's going to suspend enemies, and every few seconds you're going to get an energy orb while the enemies are suspended and while you're killing enemies. When shields run out, the enemies are smashed into the ground. We should never be hitting that point, but as you can see, it's suspending them, and then we're going to cause a lot of damage in this based on the Aegis Scale Augment. Now, the Aegis Scale Augment is the most important part of this build. In Aegis Gale, what it says here is, during Aegis Storm, Baelfire has an alternate fire. It deals 15% of our maximum shield as additional damage. You can get this augment from either Cephalon Suitor or the Perrin sequence, or you can just get it off the marketplace. Or if you have a friend who has these reputations for the syndicates, you can get it off of them. And it costs 25,000 reputation points. But alternate fire is basically going to be, for me on PC, alternate fire is always mouse 3. If you have a different keybind, you may want to check that out. And if you are playing on console, I'm also not sure what your alternate fire is going to be. But again, you can probably customize all of that. So now that we've gone over the abilities, I do want to show you some of the Hellminth alternates that you could put in slot 3. So follow me to the Hellminth. So once we are in looking at the Hellminth here, obviously I have the Haven ability Hellminth over with the shields, but some of the other options that you could consider, which would also be kind of useful. Molt, which would be Saren's ability. This will basically increase your movement because you can hit this while you're hovering. It will slightly increase your movement, and if you're hovering close to the ground, like I said before, like only a foot or so off the ground, you can use Parkour Velocity to get around, so this can help for movement. You can also use Nourish, which is Grendel's ability. Now, it does alter this when you're not on Grendel, obviously, but enemies that attack or are attacked suffer viral damage up to 1 stack, and energy sources provide more energy. This buff extends to your squad mates. So this just basically gives us some passive damage and more energy to everybody who's not us. It could be useful. I'm not really sure it's the most useful on a shield Warframe, but it is just something that you could do for some passive damage. We also have Pull, which is Mag's ability. Basically, she pulls in enemies and then stuns them in front of her. If you feel like there are enemies that are too far away out of your range of Aegis Gale, you could use this to pull them directly under you when you're shooting in your 4th ability. Another good option that you could do, we do have Roar, which I think is a good buff. This basically gives increased damage to allies near you for a short period of time. We've also got one of my personal favorites, which is Azata's Whisper, which is from Zaku. It wields void damage for all attacks from equipped weapons when activated. This I love to use on my Titania, but you can also use this here in Hildryn, because your exalted weapons, you know, they count as weapons. So this is actually going to give you more damage than if you were using just Roar. However, this is personal to you, and Roar would be for you and your teammates. And void damage is good because it ignores certain damage types, like if you are trying to damage like sentience, basically it just gives you a bit of extra boost. Now something else, now I can't use this right now because it's actually subsuming, but there is Eclipse, which is Mirage's ability. If you tap it, it temporarily reduces the damage that you take. If you hold it, it increases your weapon damage, and that damage increases up to 30%. The damage reduction is 75%. And the duration on this is not bad. So if you are able to get a spare copy of Mirage available on the circuit, I got her last week from the circuit because, dummy me, I sold some of my basic Warframes before the Hellminth was ever a thing many years ago. And then the Hellminth came out. But anyway, this is also a good option. I'm not too sure that there's any other options here. Now, of course, I'm not familiar with some kings that I don't have. But you could do Blood Altar if you have a normal Garuda in here. It will just heal your health. However, we really shouldn't be suffering health damage unless you're against like certain enemy types that can bypass your shields. Some of the other things down here, I mean, Gloom might not be bad, honestly. If you have a normal Sevagoth you can put in, Gloom might be alright. And yeah, no, I feel like those might be it. So personally, I would recommend, if you're not using rebuild shields, and like I said again, pillage only hits if you're close to the enemies, so you may just want to have this in case you're hovering higher above the ground. You don't have to worry about being in range of anything. Hovering is nice. Roar is okay. Roar would share your damage with Zata's. Honestly, I think Zata's Whisper would be a little bit better for some extra ability. You can also use Chroma's ability, but Chroma's ability is actually tied to the color of your Warframe, so you have to have either like orange, purple, green, or cold, which is blue. And so you would have to make your fashion frame one of those colors in order to match that thing that you want. So in order to have the shield bonus, you have to have purple energy, purple Warframe stuff going on. Honestly, I'm not really a Chroma player. But yeah, and then like I said, Eclipse is good. Molt would just be, again, for some movement. Nourish is not bad for some passive damage. So those would be the best abilities that I would consider from the Hellminth. And then I'm going to show you my mod setup here. Now keep in mind I could have a few extra upgrade levels on some mods, but that costs credits. I mean, I have some credits right now until I upgrade something and then they're all going to go away. But in my arcane slots I have Molt augmented. Obviously if I could upgrade this I would, but on kill you get some ability strength, stacks up to 250 times. This is a really good mod. I've also got arcane velocity, which is on critical hit. I get 90% chance for 20% fire rate to pistols for 9 seconds. Their exalted weapon does count as a pistol. Now if I had it, I would be using arcane barrier, but I don't happen to have that because arcane barrier is on shield damage, 6% chance to instantly restore all shields with a 6-second cooldown. And I have been handing in reputation for Voss4 to trade in Sanctum Anatomica to try to get it, and I just haven't gotten it. And then what I'm using here in my aura, I'm using Corrosive Projection, which is enemies lose armor. This just simply makes it easier to kill enemies with abilities, especially among high-level enemies. I have Primed Sure-Footed, which is chance to resist knockdown. This would go all the way up to I think like 100 if I had this mod maxed out, but I'm also going to have to form a something if I want to do that and finish upgrading it. As you can see, I've got Primed Redirection, which is shield capacity. If you don't have Primed Redirection and you're just using regular, you are going to have a little bit less shields. And if that is the case, then I'm also going to recommend that you use something like Augur or Cord in addition to Redirection. You're going to have to sack something, probably some range or efficiency in order to do this, but you do need to have a good amount of shields. Luckily, with just the one shield mod as the Primed, I do have above 5,000. But yeah, you could also use like shield capacity and health, and which is in Vigor. But just look and see what you've got in terms of shields in order to strengthen that if you don't have the primed one. I am using some negative mods here. I've got Transient Fortitude, I've got Overextended. These come from the Orcan Dragon Bolts, which you can find on Deimos. This will be a Nightwave ability at some point, and I do need to make a guide on those. I've also got Duration, which while I've got the Duration, this actually enables me to use Transient Fortitude to get more ability strength. Got more ability strength here with Intensify. I've got some range. So as you can see, I've kind of gone for over 200% range because range is really important when we are in Aegis Gale, just so that we can suspend more enemies. And then the most important thing of this, as I said before, is the Aegis Gale Augment. This is not optional. This is a mandatory part to make sure that this build works. And then, of course, I do want to share here about the Baelfire Charger Prime, because this is important. You do have to have this game modded and maxed out to really be doing any kind of damage. So I've got Secondary Merciless on this, on kill, plus 5% damage for 4 seconds, stacks up to 12 times. You could do something else, but to be honest, I think that I just like this one personally. I'm using Lethal Momentum for projectile speed. I do a Fulmination. It improves the blast radius of weapons with radial attacks, which is what this is. I do have Pistol Pestilence. You get this from Corrupted Vor. Corrupted Vor shows up quite a lot in Duviri, but if not, he does show up in like Orcan, Void, like Void survival missions. I say if you like just go into Void survival, spend like 5 to 10 minutes, you should get at least 1 Vor each time. I've got Prime Target Tracker for critical damage, which I do need to finish upgrading now that I have some credits. Same with Hornet Strike, because I think I got a primed one. Not too sure if I did actually. No, but I do need to finish maxing out my stuff. I've got some Electricity and Heated Charge, so I've got Radiation, which is more damage to Sentience than Murmur, because that's where I was farming bounties at. I've also got Lethal Torrent on here, and I have Barrier Diffusion. Now, once I finally find some time in my life to farm Arbitration, I will be using Galvanized mods. However, if you are busy and like me, you just don't have time to farm Galvanized, just the regular multi-shot is fine. Obviously, if you have the Galvanized mods, that's what you're going to be using instead, because they do have more perks on them. Now, on a side note here, because I don't have these bought and or upgraded, I do just want to show with you some of the Galvanized mods. You know what I'm talking about. This is the Arbiters of Hexus. You can find them in most relays. I've just gone to the Shredder relay on Earth. So here you can see there's Galvanized Diffusion. When it is fully maxed out, it is 110% multi-shot, so it's actually 10% less than regular Diffusion. However, on kill, you're getting plus 30% multi-shot for 20 seconds, stacks up to 4 times. So 3 times 4, that's like 120. So you're actually looking at over 200% multi-shot when you're using this mod. We've also got, if you were going for more of a status kind of thing, which might be good to put this on somewhere depending on what you have. There's Galvanized Shot, which is plus 80% status chance, and on kill plus 40% direct damage per status type, affecting the target for 14 seconds, stacks up to 3 times. So obviously the more status types that you're proccing with your weapon, the more that this is going to give you more damage. We've also got Galvanized Crosshairs, but this is more on headshots when aiming. I don't really think this is that useful, to be honest. And then this one doesn't really count, so we're not going to look at that. But yes, just Galvanized Diffusion and Galvanized Shot. And thanks to whoever gave us a blessing, you're a very kind and wonderful person. But yeah, that's what these mods look like. So you do need 20 Arbitration Honor Vetus Essences each in order to get these. And then you need a heck ton of credits to upgrade them. And you gotta farm it to find some space to put these on your weapon. So here I've loaded into Shrine Defense just because I personally need to get some more Steel Path done. So what we're doing here, you see we're going into 4. We're just gonna kill enemies. Like I said, very efficient in Steel Path. We are gonna kill a whole lot of things, and because I'm hovering, I'm just gonna use shields. However, if I was low, I could use pillage. But essentially, that's all we're really doing here, is we are going to, oh, somebody fell. I had to get them here. We're just really using our alternate fire, and we're just gonna run around and just shoot things in alternate fire. And you can control your hover height. You just gotta watch it, because sometimes if you hover too high, you may not, like I said, you may not be able to get pillage in on the enemies. And another thing that I want you to note, on melee weapons you can add parkour velocity. That actually enables you to move faster, because for example, what I could do if I'm down on the ground like this, I can actually double tap shift, and I can move real fast like this by double tapping shift when I'm close to the ground. Now, if I happen to have parkour velocity or a melee incarnon, which I need to build some melee incarnons, you can actually get more increased velocity and speed from using the melee incarnons. So that would be Kratos or Inadem. I believe Kratos is people's main pick for movement speed. That is it for this build guide. I hope the information in this video helped you. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.